All right. I'm VJ Gardner. I write medieval themed fantasy, so I kind of have to delve into historical building and methods and such to make my world a little more realistic. And so, yeah, I hang out on the History Channel a lot. So, yeah, the Romans are a fascinating subject, and we'll get into them a little deeper. And so, you.
Quick introduction. My name is Daniel Jeffery. I like old stuff. I have a master's degree in scientific analysis of archaeological material. Most of my archaeology and anthropology research has been focused around iron and metalworking, production technologies and finishing technologies. So my Rome was not the center of most of what I studied, but there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened in Rome. And so questions for me are mostly going to be around more general anthropological issues related to it and the metalworking technologies there.
I'm Kevin Evans. With my wife, I write for the Grantville Gazette and the 1632 Universe from Bain. My claim to fame is I used to live on a Roman road in Germany for 5 years. I have a tool and die maker's ticket for making stuff, and you know, don't tell me something can't be done.
My name is John Lundwall. I have a graduate degree in myth and religious studies, author of the book Mythos and Cosmos, Mind and Meaning in the Oral Age. My expertise isn't Roman engineering, but it is in history.
All right. Well, let's start with the Roman roads. Why did they make them so straight, and how did they make them to last? How did they build them to last?
So maybe we start with why make roads?
Yeah.
The Roman Empire expanded over a lot of Europe, and some edged into the Middle East, and they wanted the most efficient, direct route to march their armies through and control their provinces.
Yeah, but the spinoff was it made the most efficient economic system in the world.
Absolutely.
Just flat out. Not even the Chinese did quite what the Romans did.
Right, and many of today's roads start a similar way to the Roman roads. They build them up to a level, and then they begin laying down a base layer. And as they build up that base layer in levels, that gives the road strength and durability. It allows for water to run through and off the road. A lot of the roads were elevated a little bit, and then they use solid, large cobbles to finish the top, and there are many of them that are still functioning and utilized. And
Highway B10 in Germany is a Roman road.
There are two reasons you mentioned to build roads: military and commerce. So in your stories that you're writing, you ask, how is my stuff getting around? If it's not on roads, then what is it on? If you're seafaring, if that's how you do trade, then seafaring cultures make actually technological innovations based on that. So a good question is, how's my stuff getting around in my world, and what does it look like? How is it developed, and who controls it? Because whoever controls it controls the world. China built the Great Wall, Rome built the Great Highway, 50,000 miles of highway, and not like our modern I-15, right? So when they built a Roman road, how deep would they dig?
they would dig, I believe it was like 3 feet down at least, to make sure they cleared everything.
As much as 30 feet.
Yes.
Depending,
I
yeah.
mean, you have massive variation depending on what was needed on the time period when they were doing it. You have lots of Roman road that still count as Roman road that were still just tracks that they go gravel on. I mean, the ones that we pay attention to are the really cool,
Right.
super chiseled flagstones that you couldn't fit a knife blade in between. But a lot of that 50,000 miles of road was just,
Well,
it was a cleared, maintained track.
the Romans do have the most expensive road base ever.
Right.
They
There's a
took-
reason we don't do that nowadays, right?
Oh, no, what they did is they would take molten lead, mix gravel with it, and and pour leadcrete under their roads.
It's kind of like my wife's meatloaf.
Well, you look at the Appian, so the Appian Way is your big first Roman road, right?
Don't you text that to her. Oh, no.
Yeah.
From Rome to Capua, when they first captured Capua, as Rome was really starting to take over territory, the Appian Way was the first one they put in. And there, it was volcanic rock that they mined out, polished down, fitted, and you had the Appius would he went blind partway through the project. And he supposedly would walk along the road barefoot to see if they'd done it right and make sure that there weren't any cracks that he was unhappy with. But the original version of the Appian Way wasn't a road all the way through. When they first finished it, they went through some boggy areas that were super difficult. Lots of people died from malaria. And then they had sections where it was just too boggy or too watery, and they'd have a ferry in that area. Eventually, later, they built it up and the road went all the way through and there were no ferry sections. There was no need to get on a boat or anything else. But it progressed. The initial road was as much a statement by Rome about how awesome Rome is as it was, we actually need a road that is super polished and you can't fit a knife between the cracks. But that's what they did as a political power statement. That was a significant part of building that road and of all of your Roman roads. It was Rome asserting their control.
They also had mile markers that would venerate the Roman leadership and talk about who built the road and different things.
And they built their graveyards along the road.
Yep.
So that as people would go along, they'd see the graves of leaders and it would remind people of their mortality, but the funerary practices would have especially notable figures showcased along the road. So as you traveled, they'd be remembered and seen, right? And you'd have, it's talking about the power component of it. It's Rome, as they assert, we can get here quickly, we can control this, but they also assign curators who are responsible for those roads. The governors from the different areas placed a high value on road. In our world, infrastructure's not sexy. Nobody wants to fix that crumbling concrete bridge because that costs money and you're cool if you build something new. But in the Roman society, there was a high value placed on those roads, and the curator who kept his roads in good shape, that was a high prestige thing among these competing Roman leaders. My roads are the best. People love to travel in my state.
So if you are an opposing culture and the Romans are building a road because they're conquering your neighbors or things like that, was there like an angst, or was there like an idea of these opposing cultures that we can't let them do this, we need to try to do what we can to stop it?
Well, they can't let them was a rough part, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly, right? You know they're coming closer. If you want to look up something interesting, look up Caesar's bridge that he built over the Rhine.
Oh, yeah, the Germanic.
You think about being on the other side of that as this bridge is coming across the Rhine toward you, and it's this feat of engineering that you wouldn't dream of even attempting, and it just keeps coming.
Yeah, and they build it very, very fast. And by the time they got to the other side, the Germanic tribes had decided these guys are not worth fighting if they can do this. And there was no battle, and the Romans tore down the bridge, and that was that.
Was just actually going to ask, are we talking about the bridge that he left about half of it left, just to say, like, if you try anything, I'm coming for
The
you.
bridge is still here as a monument.
Yeah, well, another psychological war thing was building the ramp up the site of Masada. Okay, they threw away the equivalent of billions to make a statement because they weren't afraid of spending money on stuff. Another interesting thing about the Romans attached to the roads are the Roman castles they built that day's march down the road. In Salzburg, Germany, they have a field, a Roman fortress in it. Half the field is intact as a field, and the other half has been completely restored. And if you walk into the barracks, and you've been in the military, it's the same barracks. Okay, it's laid out the same, the beds are set up the same, the NCO quarters in the end are the same, the sanitary facilities are the same. They did the prototype, and we haven't varied from it in thousands of years, because it works.
Same thing with the Coliseum and modern day sporting arenas. The Coliseum, well, that brings us to cement, concrete. That is another Roman invention that has really built our world, is that invention by the Romans of this concrete. There are buildings that they have built with concrete that are still unmatched. The Coliseum was very carefully planned to control how fast people could get out so that everybody got out in an orderly fashion and there wasn't this mad dash of panic because the upper layers were narrowed, so they had to come down more slowly. And you know, if they had to evacuate, they could do it quickly and efficiently. The Romans were very big on efficiency.
Yeah, they weren't much for artists, but they were the greatest engineers in history.
Hey, oh, go ahead.
Did you have a question? Oh, okay.
I was going to comment. When you think about technology, we've had a saying in English that necessity is the mother of invention, right? I take issue with that statement. And one of my professors was strongly in the opinion that you should rephrase that to necessity is the mother of innovation. Because in a necessity situation, in a situation where things are desperate, you're going to take minimal risk and you're going to use all of the knowns that you've got. You're going to do the best you can to modify what you've got and get a likely positive result. Invention is what happens when you've got excess. We see invention in the periods where they had enough. They could pay a guy to be a painter for his whole life or to just go play with stuff. That's how we got iron. Iron came around, the very, very first iron artifacts we have are jewelry, where somebody said, hey, when I do this thing, I end up with this stuff. What can I do with this stuff? And then fairly quickly we started figuring out, hey, iron's pretty easy to make. We can do a lot of other things with it. But invention happens, really big steps happen when we when we have excess, when we can just mess around with stuff, try something new, things are good. And when we need to move tight, when we don't have very many resources, when people's lives are on the line, then we innovate. We make minimal changes to achieve better results. I'll just throw that out there in terms of world building and thinking about how you create your technologies.
Why don't we use like what one, I forget which one you said that the design of the Coliseum was for like the maximum efficiency. Why don't we use that maximum efficiency in like modern day stadiums if we don't use it?
So,
Well, actually, we do.
Oh.
Stadiums are big money. Big money deserves a lot of respect from people building, and they're going to do the very best they can with the money they've got.
Like,
It
but
doesn't
why
seem
don't?
efficient because of the people in it.
Yeah, like, but what I'm saying is that why don't we incorporate what the Romans used in where the upper levels had less space to kind of control the.
We do, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, go up to the Salt Palace and look at the way that place is designed, and then consider it from the aspect that you're the guy in charge of how people move through it. And then look at how, you know, as you get higher, the stairs get a little smaller, because that way the people coming down don't flood over the people that are already at the bottom. And how the arches are really big at the bottom so you can get out in a hurry. So that it's kind of like a plumbing system.
Yeah, now I get it.
Well, and speaking of plumbing, the Coliseum actually had drinking fountains and restrooms.
Wow.
So you have this large base of people who are building this stuff, which I presume a lot of times it's the soldiers or slaves or people doing
Many
it.
times it was slaves.
But how do you keep the, I guess, the moral spirit up, to keep people motivated to know, oh, I've got to get up and do this again tomorrow, we're going into this new territory, there's not really anything for me, the merchant down the street's going to make a bank off of what I'm doing. How do you get a large group of people to be so motivated that they're going to listen to the blind guy walking barefoot over the snow?
So that's a super interesting question, right? Because you're talking, here you're getting into the cultural element.
Leadership.
How do we get this? How do we make people care? I had a professor who was an Egyptologist. He had a day that he was working in, and one of the things that they looked at was some pyramid stones that had been removed from the pyramid. And as they were looking at these stones, they found markings on the stones that were of the nature, this was placed by the fashion, or this was placed by, you know, Joe's group. And I mean, they were literally like competitive graffiti on the inside of this stone that gives you some insight into exactly that question. There was a sense among these teams that competition and success, where historically we'd always thought, oh, these were just slaves. And the argument that was being made by the anthropologists who were looking at that was that there was a religious component to many of these people who were participating in it. They were arguing that they were believing they were participating in something that was bigger than themselves that mattered. Religion is one major way that the humans have done that throughout history. Making people care about something that they don't care about. Believing that the thing that they're doing has an impact beyond themselves. And therefore, maybe things aren't perfect for me, or maybe the social hierarchy isn't great, but there's purpose to what I'm doing. And you know, caste systems are another way that that's been accomplished in a number of different cultures. Believing, well, you can't be that guy because you weren't born a merchant, but you can be the best bricklayer you can be.
Do you have anything to add, Joe?
Well, one of the great losses of modern technology versus ancient technology is the symbolic component. Modern technology is just efficient. It's like the LDS Ward House, a white cinder block building that the insane go to every Sunday. In the ancient world, everything had a symbolic component that was part of their identity. The Colosseum was a model of the cosmos. The chariot races were a reenactment of the movement of the heavenly spheres. The building of the roads was an extension of not only the Roman Empire, but ordering the cosmos out of chaos. Whereas the Rhine, see, all these ancient peoples had ideas embedded into the natural landscape. The rivers represented something to them. The mountains represented something to them. So when you build a bridge across a river, it's more than just building a bridge across a river. It's an existential crisis of faith, right? Because that was your boundary. That was the edge of your cosmos. And now someone just bridged it, and they're building a road which is an extension of their cosmos into yours. So all this symbology is lost in our day, where everything is built for efficient means, whereas in the ancient world everything was a representation, a repetition of the cosmogony, of recreating the world, recreating the sacred center, recreating the culture. And so that was part of the technology.
So if they're rebuilding their technology and they're obviously rebranding that environment to be in the shape of Rome in this instance, so these curates, I think is what you call them. the people-
Curators is one of the terms of Russian.
But the people who were in charge of the roads, did they have any religious significance or any type of capability where they're trying to show to the native peoples, hey, this is Rome, and if you guys are lucky enough, maybe you can become, you know, a subservient section of our group because we are these awesome engineers and know how to do all this stuff because the gods are shining more favorably upon us than upon you.
One of the things the Romans brought to their conquered territories was running water, bathrooms. Every household could have water running to it. And the Romans, with their aqueducts, they knew how to make water run uphill if they had to. And they did that and brought water to every city that they built. And this was a huge change for the residents from having to dig wells and pull water up from the ground. And instead of drawing it up with a bucket, they had a wheel to, you know, someone would run on that would pump that water up. There were different ways the Romans knew how to control the water. And by controlling the water and giving the people fresh water for drinking and sanitary use, and the bathhouses, this was an enticement to keep their newly conquered territories peacefully compliant with the Roman way of life. And they integrated their local gods into the Roman pantheon to try and, you know, subdue any thoughts of revolt too.
So they would incorporate what the other races had to try and say, hey, your river god, he actually has a Roman name and he's our buddy over here.
Exactly.
See, I don't know how often it was the Romans choosing to do that, or it was the local population. Because when you have two cultures coming into contact, right? Generally, one culture is going to, I mean, it's like tectonic plates. Usually, one's going to get subverted and one's going to come on top. And when that happens, you usually get an admixture. Some of the things from the subverted culture will get integrated into the conquering culture. And you have the Romans, I'm trying to remember, how much effort did the Romans put into trying to preserve existing structures? I mean, they did, like with the Jews, you see a clear example, where they preserved the existing hierarchy, and then they said, now you answer to us, we're just above your hierarchy. And that's what the Vikings did really heavily. You know, the Kiev and Rus is a great example. The Vikings come in, they said, sure, we're just going to be on top and you guys can keep doing things the way you were, but now we're the leaders. And the Romans often did similar things where they would come in, they put their structures in place, but they'd still encourage you to rule yourselves the way you were. And, you know, and I mean, you have different levels of that. Like, you look at what happened in England, and the relationship they had with the Celts. If you're familiar with Boudica and what happened there, the problem was they broke their contract, right? That's why she rebelled, was because they promised that when her father died, her mother and then his daughters would be the rulers of that tribe. And when they did, and when he died, the Romans said, "No, we're just going to take your lands and we're not going to honor that," which started that whole rebellion.
But she's a Brython.
Well, and also she really wreaked havoc, and they call it Boudican glass, where some of the towns they dug up, everything was just so melted that even the sand became glass. She set everything on fire. So there were those that rebelled. But there are still a lot of Roman bathhouses and different things. And
Did you see the thing where they rebuilt the hypocaust in Turkey? The hypocaust is they would have a double-layered floor and run hot air under your floor to heat your house and up the walls. And an anthropology group in Turkey took an old site and completely rebuilt it from the ground up as a functioning, heated and cooled house, and bathhouse.
We've got a couple different topics here. On your point, the cultural element, they're all polytheistic cultures, okay? In polytheistic cultures, it's much easier to assimilate other pantheons. In monotheistic cultures, you wipe out the pantheon and you replace it with the one God, okay? So the Romans were polytheistic, their enemies were polytheistic that they conquered, but there is a level of assimilation that goes on because they're used to doing that, right? They pick up, hey, this God works for me, I'm going to add this attribute to my God, and they start synthesizing. Polytheistic cultures are very, very good at that. Having said that, the synonymous with the Roman road is the Roman fort. And if they're building a road into your territory, they're building a fort in your territory. And the fort not only has a barracks, which has been the same for apparently thousands of years, it has a shrine. Right? There is a religious component. The foreign gods are coming in. It's like the white hand of Saruman's orcs are marching onto your territory. And, well, you might be able to assimilate the white hand into your pantheon. You still don't want it, right? And so so as the road gets built, the fort gets built, and the gods get changed. And they recognize this. So there is, that's terrible.
But a key part of that mix-up of ideologies as things change is the change of the power structures, right? The people, we talk about armies coming in and fighting. Well, the armies fight because the person who runs the country now doesn't want to not be the person running the country anymore. So as you have a new group coming in, it shakes up the economic structure. How do we make money? Who makes the most money? Well, if we were farmers, and all of a sudden we have all this Roman contact, and merchants now occupy a different place in the society, you have massive turnover in the architecture of that culture and how people interact with each other because of this interaction with the new culture. You look at Polynesia as we came in, I bring that up because we have a lot of actual anthropological studies of what happened in Polynesia with the introduction of Western culture. And the structures where you had a power structure based on the number of cows or how many yams you gave to somebody. And all of a sudden it shifts to, well, can I afford to go to the movies? That's what makes me cool now, is that I have actual Western currency that I can spend on Western things. And you have your traditionalists who say, no, these are our cultural values. And you have your new blood that says, I don't have to follow your system, and I can be cooler than the elders, and I can have more money. And you have the whole nouveau riche thing happen every single time you get this cultural interaction. And there will be generations of people who will hang on to, I'm the granddaughter of the chief, who was the real ruler before these upstarts came in 150 years ago. And then you'll have people that are like, yeah, that's great, but I actually own everything, and I can do whatever I want because I have money. So that mix-up is both a layer of gods and religion and economics and government power structures that all change when you have this new force come in. And people take advantage of that. And we're humans. You have the humans that were almost naked. So you have the Peter Pagans, right? The little fingers that are like, hey, stuff's happening. I can screw everybody and win. Or you have the people that say, no, things work for me. I don't want the system to change. And they're all competing in this mix-up of what was maybe stable for 100 or 200 or 300 years. We know how the system works. This is how it's always worked. This is our tradition. And that's not stable anymore.
People are dynamically unstable.
Yes, and people are always trying to shift that, right? There's always going to be somebody who is looking for that chance to become the boss.
Yeah,
and
but
this is
what you have to do is go back and consider that these Romans are people just like us. Okay, they're not inferior, they're not ignorant, they're not under people. They're real human beings, they have real human motivations. And, well, okay, I write alternate history where they go back in time. And you've got downtimers and uptimers. The uptimers are from the future. And my co-authors, we have to work really, really hard to convince them that the downtimers are intelligent and have their own motivations, and they're not just a wooden cutout to tell your story against. They're real people. They have the same motivations. They have capacity. You got people who are doing calculus in their head with no aids whatsoever at this time. So you got to consider them as people, and you've got to consider that people are going to do pretty much the same thing no matter what culture they're in. Because they have the same motivations and drives.
These ancient people were essentially, they built a device, the antitherican device, that as close as we figured out would predict celestial events, the months, the days, the years, the eclipses, the moon cycles, all of that. And it's an actual device. It's a rudimentary
That's not so
computer.
rudimentary. You could try and build one.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to, circuits and power and whatever. But it actually worked. It actually worked. And there's
It's
a
like
lot of...
finding a DVD player in the 2nd century BC, that device. It contradicted decades of assumptions, but the decades of assumptions were wrong. Ancient peoples are just as smart as modern peoples, and modern peoples are just as stupid as ancient peoples, because people are smart and stupid.
And how much have we forgotten that if a disaster happened, how much have we forgotten how to do that a majority of civilization would now be dependent upon the very few who remember how to weave cloth and how to grow food and things like that. Suddenly the tables have turned.
This actually made me wonder, because a couple of you were in your stories, is there, as I've heard before, that the booster rockets on the Enterprise space shuttle, their size has been determined by Roman roads, effectively, if you go back through history and the causes. How much is there, because I've heard that's also an oversimplification, but is that true? It's kind of what you were just talking about, keyed in my head.
The gauge of a railroad
Yeah.
was determined by some Roman bureaucrat who decided that he didn't want freight wagons rolling through his town. So he put up big stone blocks with slots in them that would let chariots through but would not let freight wagons through. And then when they decided to do railroad, they had these stones with the slots in them. They put it down, they put a rail in this slot, a rail in that slot, and they had a railroad. Okay.
There's truth to that.
So and supposedly the distance between chariot wheels was determined by the size of the tail end of your horse. But unintended consequences, little things, there's nothing as permanent as something done temporarily. Okay.
Yeah.
Fort Riley, Kansas, got a temporary building there, and Custer left, said don't change anything till I get back, and they haven't. So yeah, we all influence. We influence all history. You could do something that you consider really inconsequential and change the entire future.
Yeah.
And you'll never know what happened.
Well, and think about the medieval time period after the Romans withdrew. A lot of Europe, they destroyed the aqueducts and a lot of the Roman stuff out of anger at being conquered. But they forgot how to have running water and, they kind of plunged.
The whole concept we've got of the good old days
Yeah.
was the Romans were better than us and we can never be that good again. We proved them wrong, but the good old days kind of stems from the Dark Ages where the Romans left.
And the unwashed masses are, that after the Romans left and the bathhouses fell into disrepair and everybody decided you didn't need to bathe.
Well,
The greatest technology in human history is water management. I know it's not, I
Absolutely.
know it's not sexy, right? We want our laser guns and our Harry Potter wands. But really, what transforms civilization is the ability to move water. And so, you know, in your world building, that's a good question. What are my most essential resources that my civilization uses? It might not be water. How does it get from point A to point B? Who builds it? Who maintains it? Who protects it? Who wants it?
And where does the waste go?
Where does the waste go, right? Yeah?
Sorry, this is my question. Okay, you mentioned Masada, Herod's palace. I know how they got water in through the cisterns. I have no idea what happened to it after that.
well, they used it and then they put it in the sewers. The Romans
Did have
developed sewers
yeah.
that were still in use in Paris
Then how come they didn't go up through the sewers to invade Masada?
because Masada was on top of a rock and you just dumped it over the edge,
Okay, so the sewers all went off the
off the cliff.
That's how I road trip.
Over the cliff.
How did
No,
you know?
sanitation, okay, field sanitation in the military, going into civic sanitation and civil engineering. We owe huge and tremendous debts to these original thinkers that came up with the first, this is the slope that you should have on a pipe to make sure you get the most water moving through it. Petra there's a program on it recently. Petra's
Oh, yeah.
big claim to fame, and the reason it was powerful wasn't their culture so much as they had a masterful set of civil engineering that allowed them to keep a civilization going in one of the most hostile environments on the planet.
They
You know, you
knew
come
how to
over this
collect.
rise into the canyon, and there's acres of gardens.
They knew how to collect and keep
Again,
every drop of water possible.
and they influenced Rome.
One of the things that defines Rome, and one of the reasons we look back to Rome, is record keeping, right? There were things like we talk about the things that they drew from Petra, things that they drew from Babylon,
Yeah.
things that they drew from cultures that preceded them that we don't have as good a record of. We don't have as clear a picture. And so we attribute many of these things, oh, it's just Rome, right? Or people think, wow, the Romans came up with all this stuff. Well, the Romans built on the people in front of them too. But the Romans did a better job of writing it down and transferring it to us.
In fact, the Romans invented the book, the Codex. Before the book, it was scrolls, right? You'd have 40 different works on one 80-foot-long scroll, right? The Romans invented the book, and they invented the newspaper, the acta, which they would carve either on stone, sometimes even on metal, but they would place a tablet of the current events in the town square, and someone would actually recite it. But that was your current events, your acta, your newspaper, and your book. And what are the consequences of those innovations? They are huge.
Puts money in my pocket.
They are huge. The invention of the book changes the
How do you all feel about books?
way people organize information, changes the way people read information, changes the way people write information, right? It changes this entire ecosystem of writing by the invention of the book. So,
And it promotes literacy.
yes.
It validates and encourages literacy.
Remember that literacy and knowledge is power. The way people are controlled is when they're forbidden to learn how to read and write. That's how people are controlled. That's how people are enslaved.
And this is kind of more interesting, maybe a slightly different question. In Rome, because we're talking about all these civil engineering projects, were civil engineers and people like that highly valued in that society?
Absolutely.
Are they comparably valued today, do you think, in our society?
Not enough.
Not as much as, okay, you know, people, when I was a kid, going and becoming an engineer was a big deal. Your future was locked in stone, you were secure. Nowadays, the prestige careers have moved on to other areas. But, you know, my boy, I'm telling him, listen, go get yourself an electrical engineering degree. every town in America has to have an electrical engineer to read the blueprints for building permits, you will always have a job. Okay? So yeah, engineers are still really important. If I could change the engineering criteria, I'd make them be a technician for a year, because some of these kids think the book is right.
But in the ancient world, look, so Smith, the first iron workers, right? They transformed civilization.
Yeah.
And
Let's wrap up. We're
Oh,
almost
all right.
done. So, last words.
Go ahead, finish.
Finish up.
Well, the point is that in some cultures, they are gods and treated as such. And in some cultures, they're such a threat to the godly order that they're banned. Cain, of Cain and Abel, his name means smith. And he was rejected because he's associated with ironworking. And of course he murders his brother, but it's hard to tell which is worse. So that was my only point.
Okay, so any final words?
Me?
Yeah,
Any final?
Start with you and come
Final
back.
words.
Final words.
It's time for your last words, John.
All right. I was young and I needed to work. Okay, what do you got?
When you're using this, Rome has been the fallback, go-to thing for literature for as long as we've got history that we know about. You can do a lot worse than using them as a model. Just don't get locked up at, don't get locked in stone. You do your own stories. But here's a great example. You can pull just about anything you want out of Rome to fit it into what you're doing.
One of the things that we look for as humans love patterns. We love to see patterns. We create our religions and we create our, we make our choices based on what we believe are true patterns. And as you look at Rome, and as you look at your ancient Chinese and Mesopotamian empires, we see patterns of how humans behave and how humans interact with each other. As you study history, what you want as an author is to see, just as we want to create realistic characters that act like people, your cultures should act like human cultures. And as you watch the patterns of what humans do when another culture is attacking their culture, what humans do when their culture's been stable for a long time, what humans do when a disruptive technology comes along. And you look at copper and iron. Copper had established a specific trade and had a specific cachet, and copper was only available from certain locations. Iron came in, and iron's the democratic metal. Iron's everywhere. Everybody can make iron. Massive upset due to a technological change. And study for your world building, what do humans do? Watch for these patterns that recur across all cultures, because we humans create the systems that would then govern us as we participate in.
Yeah, definitely building on that. Even as you're writing a story, you've got to have that background. You've got to have that world. And even though you may be writing on another planet, you may be writing on a space station, ancient history, far distant future, there's still certain things that have to happen. Where do the clothes come from? Where does the water come from? Where does it go? What does the culture look like? And so definitely studying Rome, you can never go wrong, because there's a lot in it. There's a lot of the rise, the fall, the engineering, the firsts. There's a lot in there, and that's truly the magic of Rome, is that the Romans did a lot of things first and did a lot of things really well, and it's a good fallback. It's a good fallback for research, no matter where you're setting your stories.
Quick book recommendation. Go find a book by L. Sprague de Camp called Lest Darkness Fall. Just the quintessential treatment of the modern man in